Hi, this is Arnav, and in this video, we're going to be discussing what would be the ideal roadmap and what are the things that you need to learn to become a professional Android developer. Quickly, a little bit about myself. Previously, I was heading the mobile engineering team at Zomato, and I took care of the revamp of the Zomato app that happened in 2019 and 20. And then I've been working as the lead engineer of the Android team in Target, India. In my journey as a professional Android developer, I have had the opportunity to interview almost close to 150 candidates for different kinds of roles, whether an entry level SD2, lead engineer kind of roles. I have been had the opportunity to interview all of them, and this video is going to be taking from all of those learnings to give an idea about what are the expectations that an Android developer in a professional setup at different levels, whether somebody is an associate or a junior Android developer fresh out of college and they have joined, what are the things that we expect out of them, what are the things that we expect at later stages. You could be just getting started with development or programming at the basics level. You could have worked on a little bit of UI development, maybe made websites or something, which can be a great advantage if you are working on another platform which is also UI based. And you could also be somebody who has tinkered with Android Studio, downloaded it and tried their first app maybe, but they're trying to understand what are the things that are required, what are the prerequisites for landing an Android development job. Now I'll just give you a quick overview of what are the kind of different levels that people are looking for when they're hiring Android developers. So at a basic Android engineer level, we are looking for somebody who can join an existing Android team. There are other developers there, and you can give them features to work on. You can give them very specific specifications that the screen should look like this, clicking on that, the data should go there, and they're able to build that. As you become a more senior Android engineer, especially somebody who has 2 years or more under their belt, that kind of person would be somebody in a very big complex app. They could be given an entire vertical inside that app. So for example, inside Zomato's app, somebody could be responsible for the restaurant page, the entire restaurant listing page, or somebody could be responsible for the entire order and checkout experience, and somebody could be responsible for your profile page, wallets, cards that are getting added, the entire payment experience. They might be working with team of 3-4 more other engineers, but they are completely responsible for the portion that they are working on. And for smaller apps, they could be responsible for the development of the entire app. And finally, like the Android team leads or the architects or principal engineer kind of roles that we have. In that case, we are expecting somebody who can, talk to product and business teams and understand what the requirement is, and they can kind of visualize what has to be built inside the app. They can think of the larger architecture that needs to be done inside that app, and they can allocate that work to the team. They are the ones who are taking the decisions on whether you're building an app in MVVM or MVP, whether something's supposed to be reactive, or where the data needs to be cached locally or something like that. Those kind of decisions are getting taken by those people. So let's take a look at what are the requirements that you need to get to one of those places. But before that, I would love to clear a few very frequently asked questions that I face when I mentor people in Android development. So the first question is, I do not know programming at all. Should I start learning Android development? The short answer to that for me is no. I would say that you must understand basic programming to a level where you can deal with some data structures and algorithms, and you're hands-on with coding, so that when you start working on Android, right, by that time, syntax of the code is not something you're already fighting with. Okay. Next, I think a lot of people ask is whether they need to know Java before they start Android. I would say that if you know Java already, it's gonna be a very, very beneficial thing. When I personally started learning Android, I did not actually know Java, and I knew C++. And obviously I had to a little bit understand the syntax while I went with it. By the way, currently people who are working on Android development, new Android developers, everybody is working on Kotlin these days. But it runs on the Java virtual machine itself. So an understanding of Java definitely goes a long way towards helping you get started with Android. Another question that people ask a lot is, how much data structures and algorithms should I know before I begin? And to answer that question, I would say that if you are very clear with the basic set of data structures like linked lists, hash maps, stacks, queues, these kind of things, and you know how the operations work, and you know which data structure is suitable in which kind of a use case, that should be placing you up at a good point to start getting into Android development. Some of the very complex data structures like traversing graphs and trees and creating red black trees, BSTs, those kind of things might not be needed when you get started with Android development. On a day-to-day basis, those are things we don't need while we're building apps. Okay, what are the minimum specifications of my laptop or PC, and do I need to have an Android phone? For this, I would say, like, you do need a little bit of powerful computer, because the running the Android Studio, of course, takes a bit of resources. So something equivalent of a at least 8 Gen 9 Gen Core i5 kind of machine. At least I would say at least 8 GB of RAM. 16 is kind of preferable if you have, while the compilation process, it really helps if you have that. Do you need an Android phone? You definitely, I would say yes. You can run things on an emulator on your laptop, but that both slows down your laptop, and more than that, it's much easier to test if you actually have a device to test on. So I generally suggest going for that. Final question is making Android games and Android apps similar. This is something some people ask. They ask that whether when I start Android development, will that enable me to make games? I just want to clarify that what we're talking about today is about making Android apps, like some of the popular apps like Google's app, Facebook app, Twitter, these WhatsApp, these kind of apps. They are not similar at all to how games are made. Games are made in a very different way, and actually the way games are made for Android or iOS or even for desktop, that's all very similar. So that gets into learning Unreal Engine or Unity and making games using that. This is not related to that, actually. Okay, so big question, Kotlin or Java when you get started with? I would strongly suggest that if you're getting started today, you should get started with Kotlin, because the world in the Android development side, everybody is moving towards Kotlin in a big way. And even apps which are 8 years, 10 years old, which was primarily written in Java, the entire app, most of such apps, I know a lot of my friends in the industry, the code bases have become almost 50% in Kotlin, and it's continuously increasing. So maybe in a couple of years, you would probably very rarely find big Android apps that are written majorly in Java anymore. So if you're starting today, definitely Kotlin is the way to go. Okay, so things that are needed to get started off before you start even opening Android, I would say, is that object-oriented concepts and Java and Kotlin semantics. These are some things that I would place them firmly in the prerequisite bucket. So understanding things like, especially if you're coming from a different language, then how interfaces, abstract classes, the basic object-oriented nature of how Java works. Then is the dealing with the basic data structures that exist inside Java from before. So array lists, hash map, how the iterator works. So it's called Java collection framework in a group. So understanding that is also something very important when you start off with Android development, I would say. A very good understanding of different kinds of visibility. So what is a package? What is package visibility? What is public? What is private? How inheritance works? You should be very clear and thorough with all of these things. And finally, I think an understanding of how the exception management works. So when something goes wrong, exception is thrown. What is a stack trace? How do you try catch? They are kind of the basic stuff that I would say are prerequisites before we get started with Android development. Next, I would be, starting off with the basic skills that you need to learn in Android before you can start applying to, an entry-level Android engineer position. So the steps to do it is, first, obviously, go to developer.android.com, set up your Android Studio, open it, make your first project using the wizard, and even before editing any lines of code or anything, just build that app and see it runs on a device. That itself is quite a journey, because you will face issues in setting up maybe the Java SDK, maybe in setting up the Android Studio, understanding the project structure. That's the first step of the journey to do. After that, as you start learning things within Android, the first few things to learn is understanding what activities are. So, and then how layouts work. So activities are basically windows. So every time an app is opened on your screen, that's an activity, right? Layouts are how the UI is created on your Android phones. So how do you place a button at some place? How do you center things? How do you make a scrollable list? Those kind of things are, in the layouts. So when you're working with layouts, it's kind of important to understand a couple of concepts like what's a frame layout, what's a linear layout, what's a constraint layout, understanding which kind of layout you should use in what kind of a use case. Because, for example, something like constraint layout gives you unlimited freedom of designing a screen, but then obviously it's more complex to actually render compared to something like frame layout, which allows you much more limited options on placing things on the screen, but it's much simpler for Android UI to actually render it as well. Okay. Then the different kind of widgets that exist on Android, which is basically your, where you can put a text, where you can put a editable text where people can type, where you can put a button, where you can put an image, how those things, come together. That's kind of the things that you should just get started off. Then, again, we will come back to a little bit of theoretical and conceptual things that you need to understand at this level. So we need to understand that what is the concept of event-driven programs versus procedural programs. So a lot of people who start off with Android development, they're coming from probably history of making command line apps, where the command line program says enter the next number and you enter it. Okay, then it says enter the second number and you enter it. So basically the program is dictating what the user is supposed to do, right? In UI driven and real world application, it's more event driven. So even if you have a calculator, any of your calculator's logic does not run till the user presses the equal to button. Okay, so before that they will press some numbers and something on the screen. So your logic depends on a listener kind of logic. So it is going to be listening for people clicking a button, and whenever it listens that okay, a button has been clicked, you have to run certain parts of your logic. Okay, so the logic would not run in a linear fashion. The logic would be written in terms of functions and kept in the code, and then there will be different listeners, like listen for the app to be opened, listen for the button to be clicked, and when such something is listened for, then a certain function is going to be running. So this is very different from a very linear flowchart kind of driven pattern that you start off when you're working with basic programming. Now when you're doing real world UI apps, you have to understand how this event driven model of UI event driven model of programming works. Okay, so then as you explore more in the Android world, what are the kind of very important concepts that is expected out of anybody who is an Android engineer is the very first thing is the Android activity lifecycle. So when your app opens on the screen, app closes down, when another app is opened on top of your app, what is the life cycle that happens? Because this is a very crucial interview question that everybody asks in Android interviews. Okay. Then different kinds of components that exist inside an Android app, activities which are basically screens that are rendered on the phone, services which are background tasks that can run. Then there are receivers and providers which you learn later on is like whenever some events are happening on your phone, like a charger has been connected, network has been disconnected, network reconnected, phone has rebooted. So those are events, and you can create a receiver to listen to such events. Okay, and providers are a way for your app to provide data to another app, or fetch data from things inside the phone, like fetch contact details, fetch storage data, those kind of things. Okay. Then next thing to understand is a very important concept specific to Android is the concept of intents. So intents are this little piece of information which tells what is the next step that you want to do, especially when you're going from one app to another app. Okay, so there can be a share intent, which is like when you open your gallery, you have a photo and you click on the share button, you get a lot of options. You can share it to WhatsApp, you can share it to Facebook, you can share it to Twitter. Those kind of things happen. So that's an intent. That's an intent to share. Similarly, when maybe you're in an email app and you're trying to attach a file, when you click on attach, then it shows like, okay, there's the file manager, there's the gallery. Where do you want to attach from? So that's a maybe file open intent. Okay, so these are different intents. How do we work with intents? How do we go from one activity to another activity? How do we go from one app to another app? It all depends on intents. So understanding intents is core to the understanding of how Android works. Okay. Then on the layout side, we need to spend some time understanding how layouts written in XML interact with Java, how the IDs work in layout. So when we design our UI, it's a little bit like HTML. So we write it in XML, we design a layout, but then that layout has to interact with your Java or your Kotlin code, right? So that's where the IDs are very important. Different IDs, the Kotlin code will actually call that button using that ID, right? Then setting up something like on-click listener, which is basically the event-driven model of working, which I was just speaking before. So you should understand how to set up such listeners. That's the next thing to understand. And then, as you start making actual apps, then we need to understand how to show dynamic data and a list of data. So if you see some of the most common apps that exist in the world, like say Twitter or Facebook or any social media, they are basically glorified lists. You open the app and it's a feed, it's a list of posts, and every post looks very similar to each other. They have an user avatar, title, the content of the post, and the body of the post, and all that stuff, right? So the data is dynamic. It's coming from the API. It's not hard coded inside the app. It's coming, they're making an API call, downloading that data, and showing it on the screen. So how do you show a list of dynamic data? That's very core to understanding how Android apps are supposed to work. And these are things which are kind of like very prerequisite level of Android development needed by everybody to learn. And at this point, you can make a few projects, like you can make a calculator app, or you can make a tic-tac-toe game. These kind of things I would suggest as projects that you can build at this stage, which gives you the level of confidence, to that you are able to actually make Android apps. Okay. Then comes another conceptual stuff. So these white slides basically are where I'm talking about concepts. The blue ones are where I'm talking about Android specific stuff. So when we are starting to build some projects, then the next part which comes that we need to learn is, how do we architect our app? Where does the data go? Where does the logic go? How does the screen behave to user input, and how does the screen show output to the user? So there is generally a model view pattern, where model is the data, view is what the user is seeing, and then along with model and view, there are different frameworks and different architectures we use. There's MVC, which stands for model view controller, model view presenter, model view model. So these are all generally called the MV star family of patterns, where we discuss that this is the data, this is the screen, and here's the piece of the logic that will actually take user input, modify the data, see changes in data, and update it on the screen. What is that framework of logic that will handle that? That's the star there, and there could be different things in star. And these days, what's very common in the Android world is using the MVVM architecture. But when you're going for interviews, it will be expected that what is also MVC and MVP, and you can differentiate between them, and you can tell the pros and cons of each of those architectures. Okay. Separating your concerns, like UI stuff should not, changes in the UI should not need changes in the data layer changes should not need changes in the logic layer. So how to build an app keeping these things separate, that's kind of very important. Okay. So covering these things are very important when you want to start making more complex apps beyond something like a calculator or a tic-tac-toe game, right? Then I think closing up the set of requirements that are needed for every Android developer, even at an entry level, comes the Android architecture components, which is a set of libraries and frameworks created by Google, which helps in most of the common things that are needed while Android development. It's also known by the name of Jetpack. What are fragments? So fragments are pieces of your fragments of your app, basically, which is like a UI plus a little bit of UI related logic inside a fragment. So you can encapsulate slices of views in terms of fragments, and you can reuse the same fragment in different screens of your app, in different activities of your app. So understanding how the fragments work, the life cycle of the fragment. Then in terms of MVVM, which is like a very common pattern these days using Android development, so understanding how the view model works. How does live data work, which is like a reactive way of saving data, changes automatically shown on the screen. The repository pattern, like fetching data from the internet or from a database, how that works. Okay. And a little bit of understanding of local database management using SQLites on Android. Local data is generally stored in SQLite databases, so how do you save that, and using ORMs to do that. At this point, you can make like maybe a task list manager, or people can add tasks, and within every task they can add nodes. These kind of apps you can make at this stage. Okay. And at this stage you should make Android projects using all these architecture components that you have learned. Okay. And finally, there are a bunch of third-party libraries, common Android libraries, which are used in making almost all Android apps. Having a little bit of hands-on experience with them is something people would be expecting, because if you have made any real-world app, even as a side project, they would be using some of these libraries. So for example, for most network-related stuff, we use OKHTTP and Retrofit, which are libraries created by Square open source. Retrofit is for making REST API calls. OKHTTP is for making any network calls. Glide is an image rendering library, which is used to render images from a URL to your phone screen. Then serialization. So when you're making API calls, the data is usually coming in form of JSON or XML. So we use something like Jackson, JSON, or Moshi to do the serialization work, like turning a JSON object into a Java object. Okay, and back as well. So when you're sending data, then a Java object has to be turned back into JSON. Okay, and understanding of at this stage, you should also be kind of adept at understanding the multi-threaded nature. So Android obviously is a multi-threaded operating system, and you should not be doing some very heavy duty work on the main thread of your Android app, because if you do that, then your UI starts becoming very janky. And then if you do something that holds the UI for more than 4 or 5 seconds, then Android gives a pop-up that application is not responding as well. So any big pieces of logic, data manipulation, those kind of things should happen in background threads while the UI remains free to operate for the user. It does not get stuck. Okay. After you have learned these things, you can probably at a place where you can build something like, there is GitHub's API using which you can make like an app which tracks the trending repositories on GitHub today, something like that. Or you can use Imgur, which is a photo sharing website, use the API of Imgur and create a clone of Instagram using that data. So these kind of apps you can start making, and these apps now start looking like projects which you can actually put up on the Play Store for fun. These are fun apps, or like some people might even download it and use it. It might not be kind of apps for which you can get funded and run a startup. It's not such big an idea, but these are actually finished apps that you can put up on the Play Store, and then people might download and use it. Side project kind of things can happen out of this. So congratulations, at this point you are an entry-level Android engineer. Most companies which in general are looking for SD1 level Android engineers, they're hiring. This is the level of skill set that they're looking. So everything that we discussed till now, you have to learn all of these things to be able to get into an Android engineer role. Okay. So was this video helpful? If it was, do go ahead and press the like button. Also share with your friends who might also be interested in learning Android development. And most importantly, subscribe to the Scalar channel, because the second part of the video is about to come out in a few days. In the second part, we're going to be discussing how to go from an entry-level Android engineer to becoming a senior Android engineer, and how to become an Android lead. Okay, so stay subscribed and we'll meet very soon.